All right.
Oh,
well, gold getting another boost today by news that central banks here and in Europe are closer to printing more money to buy more debt. Well, that news may have boosted gold in the markets in the short term. Our next guest says that it could be devastating for our economy in the long term. It can only be stopped by returning to a gold standard. He is Lehrman, chairman of the Lehrman Institute and a former partner at Morgan Stanley, and also mentioned as possibly a commissioner in this GOP gold commission if Romney becomes president. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, we all read it in the Wall Street Journal. I think it was Seth Lipsky who drew attention to the fact that the Republican platform is calling for a new gold commission, patterned on the Reagan gold commission of 1981.
Which you were a part of, and they, at the end of the day, decided that it wasn't a good idea to go to the gold standard, right?
Well, one has to look at the composition of the committee. There were 22 named. It was controlled substantially by the Secretary of the Treasury, Don Regan, and Anna Schwartz, who, of course, both were opposed to the gold standard. The irony was that President Reagan himself was very sympathetic to the gold standard. Indeed, he made a 10-second spot during his campaign for the presidency, endorsing going forward, David, not returning, going forward to a modernized gold standard.
But if we went to a gold standard, it would be absolutely the reverse of what we have now, which are central banks around the world, including the Federal Reserve, pumping up or trying to pump up the economy by printing more cash. It would put an end to that, would have put a pall over our markets, which seem to like all this money printing.
Well, there's an old phrase that precedes the Fed and also precedes the remark, don't fight the Fed. It's money makes the mayor go. And, of course, that was an old Wall Street saw preceding the Federal Reserve. Look, the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. And one of the key persons was the gold Democrat Carter Glass, the great legislator from Virginia. The design of the Federal Reserve System was to support the gold standard. And that is, in fact, what was the case from the very, very beginning. So the founding of the Federal Reserve System was coincident with the gold standard and was only meant to create a slightly more elastic currency.
All right. Well, since this recent financial crisis began back in 2008, the Federal Reserve has gone on a money printing spree right here in the United States, printing about anywhere from $2.4 trillion to $2.7 trillion in order to buy up bonds, including a lot of government debt directly. They say that, hey, look, so far we don't have any inflation, so there's no harm in it. To which you say,
well, the reason why there is 2% inflation as opposed to even a greater level of inflation is that there was such a panic in Europe that everybody was racing out of the Europe into the dollar, holding the dollars that the Fed was created instead of spending them. The same in the United States. Because of the economic situation in the United States, many people are using the dollars that they receive, indeed some of them being printed by the Fed, to repay debt instead of consume. So the whole idea that we are not cooking inflation in the oven in the long run is a false idea. The key of the gold standard and going forward to a modernized gold standard is that it is a prescription for long-term economic growth. Under the gold standard, the American economy grew at 4% compounded annually from the birth of the Republic practically right up until 1971. Whereas the economy under the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing in the last decade has been growing at 1.7%. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to choose between a stable dollar, a stable general price level, and economic growth engendered by confidence in the future.
How would a shift, very quickly because we've got to go, but how would a shift to the gold standard affect the price of gold right now? Would you freeze gold at the current dollar price?
The president would have to announce that we're going forward to the gold standard. There would be a 2 or 3, perhaps even a 4-year transition where everybody reorganized their own affairs, not very much, but at the margin, in order to adapt to the fact that the dollar was no longer going to be a political football in the hands of the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing program. That would be the transition. And at the end of that period, the Congress, which alone is given the power by the Constitution to coin money and regulate the value thereof, and the states are prohibited from making anything but gold and silver a legal tender. The Congress would then stipulate in law the statutory value of the dollar, and the dollar would be as good as gold once again.
There's a lot more to talk about this subject, and if there is a President Romney, you will hear a lot more from this man who will be on the Gold Commission. Good to see you, Lou.
Good to see you, David.
Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.